There's also an emotional part I think people recognize, at least until it's too late. If you're doing it yourself, it's akin to trading. That's why we always counsel our students in our mentorship program to make sure that they're using some sort of dynamic pricing software, because a person with a pen and paper or a spreadsheet, you're just ill equipped to fight against this to really maximize the revenue of your property. All right, folks, welcome back to another episode of STR Like the Best. I'm your host, Michael Chang. It's my great pleasure to bring my friend Julie Brinkman on from Beyond Pricing. We're going to have a really fun conversation today, so stay tuned. If you're listening on the live stream, please feel free to write any questions down in the comments. We'll get to some of those questions as we see them in the chat. And if it's your first time listening to STR Like the Best, this podcast is really dedicated for short-term rental investors. We want to help you better invest your time and money. We bring on guests that can really help you identify new technology, new processes that can help you make more money and better spend your time. If you find this episode helpful, please subscribe, share it with a friend that you think this would be helpful to. Julie, welcome. We've been bantering in the background, so we finally get started.
Let's go, Michael. Okay, thanks. It's great to see you, and thank you for having me on.
Oh, thank you for joining. I don't know if you remember or not, but we met at a conference way back, right when you joined the seat, or right when you joined Beyond. So I always remember that because you're like, oh, I'm new here. And because you actually talked to me for like 30 minutes at the booth. I was like, you're the CEO. Like, why are you talking to just a random person here? So I always remember
Look
that. And I was
busy. A CEO's job is to look busy.
like, fair enough. All right. Well, besides looking busy, what do you do as CEO? What is Beyond Pricing and what do you do as CEO besides talking to random people at your booth?
Beyond, formerly known as Beyond Pricing, what we are global leading short-term rental revenue management system built specifically for short-term rentals. So what does that actually mean is if you own or operate a short-term rental, vacation rental, short let, whatever you want to call it, depending on where you are, you plug Beyond and voila, you make more money. And how we do that, we can get in the nitty-gritty, but our core, our flagship product is through our proprietary dynamic pricing algorithm. So that's where we got our start about 12 years ago back in San Francisco. And my role is Chief Executive Officer, aka CEO. I've been here now almost 6 years at Beyond, and it's been a wild ride.
Yeah. Okay. Well, let's get into that. I'm glad that sounds busy. You sound like you have a great product. And so I want to dive in because revenue management really is for us, one of the key drivers where I think a lot of people mess up. They buy a great property, great market, they amenitize it the right way, they have a beautiful listing, everything's right. They can't price properly. And then they wonder why they don't hit their projection. So, I think this is a very relevant conversation, just given the state of the world right now in short-term rentals. As you wake up every morning and you're like, what are my biggest competitors? What are they doing? How do I compete? Who do you see as your biggest competitor in revenue management? What's stopping Beyond from dominating the world?
That would imply that we are not dominating the world. So I'd say
Fair.
this is wait till there's headlines where it's CEO talks about world domination, but know that it's coming. I agree with you. So you make this huge, massive investment, and for most short-term rental owners, they are writing six-figure checks and putting a lot of money on the table. When you go to Vegas, you're not betting with that much money. These are real massive investments. And so you both have dynamics of asset management plus emotional attachment, which can lead, and we can talk about in a little while, which can lead to sort of dueling or sort of oppositional forces at play. And the answer is to let systems like ours kind of mitigate the emotional attachment and then actually get the most out of your asset. And I can talk about that.
So emotion's your biggest competitor? Is that what you're
I
saying?
think I think it's a start of our biggest headwind. So we have sort of two worlds out there in short-term rentals. One, you have the noobs, right? So they're just getting into the business. They've been operating or owning short-term rental for the last 4 or 5 years. My kids play a lot of Minecraft, so I'm fully versed in how the kids talk. I'm also very hip. My Spotify Wrapped age, by the way, is 28 years old. So this is you're talking to basically a Gen Z. You have the newer owners, operators, they're pretty tech savvy, but they've done the hard part. They've gotten the property, they've amenitized it, as you said, they've decorated it really well. Their focus is really on the guest experience.
Mhm.
But the hard part is okay, well, how do I, on a daily or weekly basis, really understand the dynamics in my market and automate the ability to get the right price? And that's where we come in. On the other side of the world, you have the more traditional, the more established property management companies that have been around for decades, right? This is pre Airbnb, this is pre OTAs. These folks know their market in and out. Because they know their market so well, there tends to be sort of a reliance on this, whether it's oral history or institutional knowledge, to inform their go forward strategy.
Yeah.
And those two things can be headwinds when it comes to adopting innovative and leading edge technologies like beyond. So it's really under the umbrella of like kind of like a complacency or an inertia with like, I've done it this way for the traditional, or I think I can do it better for the newbies, or I'm so distracted with the guest experience
Yeah.
that adopting another technology just feels too hard.
Let's decompose that a little bit. I think it's a lot there to unpack. I think for the audience here, most people are newbies, to use your term. And the way I think about it is, and I agree with your definition, there's some complacency, there's distraction, there's a lot going on in the beginning. And, revenue management is its really own discipline. It's an art and a science, the way I like to think about it. It's because there's a science part of it. Like there's a lot of numbers. There's a lot of like graphs that you have to understand and contextualize. There's also an art as well. Obviously things can be automated, right? And there are rules, but there is a way to look at the data and decide on your minimum pricing, your minimum stay lengths. Or there's a number of things that are involved. There's also an emotional part I think people recognize, at least until it's too late. If you're doing it yourself, it's akin to trading. You have this inventory there. You have to price it. There's a market clearing price that you kind of hope you get it. Your judgment can be clouded. Something personally go on in your life. If you had your car got broken into, you got this big expense, you're like, oh, now I got to pay for this, or you're feeling some risk at your job, the market's down. So there's a bunch of things that can impact you, and you're like, oh, I just want to get this out so I can like cover my mortgage. That's why like we always counsel like our students, folks that are in our mentorship program to make sure that they're using some sort of dynamic pricing software, because a person with a pen and paper or a spreadsheet you're just ill-equipped to fight against this or to really maximize the revenue of your property. I'm curious though, as you kind of look through your market segmentation, is there a big population that doesn't use any kind of software that just relies on smart pricing on Airbnb or just really does everything manually?
Yeah. I'll answer your last question first and then kind of comment on what you were saying. But so as we look at the whole world, most of the short-term rental inventory is present on Airbnb. While, only about half of the world's bookings happen on Airbnb. Given that we generate our own data pipeline to feed our algorithm, we're constantly looking at the size of the market and the changes in the market. What we can tell you is like when we look at the market, only about 10 to 15% of the total listings are changing prices daily. And so what that
Mm,
tells us is that there
mm.
is some type of dynamic pricing happening. 30% of the market have like one or two prices all year. So we call that
Interesting.
static
30%. Uh,
30%. And so we
wow.
figure out, so that's 45%. So we're guessing somewhere in like the 50 to 55% range are using the toggle on Airbnb for smart pricing, or I don't even know if Vrbo really has the market maker anymore, but
Yeah.
they're just, or they're doing some type of like seasonal rate rules either through their
Yeah.
PMS. But yes, summer should sell at this. And again, it's back to your like emotional question. I mean, look, Bitcoin dropped yesterday to like a crazy low, but I don't have like a personal attachment to Bitcoin. But if I painted a wall of a two-bedroom apartment that I'm trying to like monetize and I have a 7.5% APR mortgage, like I'm going to want to clear a certain price. And what Beyond does is like understands that there are those dynamics, but is trying to be sort of the objective human in the room, or, software in the room to say, like, understood, we'll do our best. But what we really want to do is for every available night, optimize the revenue that you get for that available night.
Let's talk about that though, right? Like, let's, without getting super technical, I know you're really smart, but like, so I don't want you to overwhelm the audience here with like a bunch of technical jargon, but maybe just talk a little bit about like, what are some of the key things that Beyond looks at, or just pricing software looks at, right?
Yeah.
That helps inform those decisions. What are some of the key metrics that you pay attention to that, has more predictive power?
Yeah. And this is where your like pen and paper spreadsheet breaks. So today, if you have for any one day, Beyond will apply up to 15 different factors that generate the price. Now, again, I'm gonna assume your audience, because they're already in this market, they already are taking this step, they're educated. And so we're talking to educated investors. What we look at broadly, we start really broad. And we look at seasonality. So, like, is it summer? Is it winter? And where your property is. We look at day of week. Is it Monday or Saturday? That has a huge difference. And then we look at events. Is there some type of like major event or even minor event that's happening that will impact pricing? If you flip Maslow's hierarchy, we start there. And then as we move along in the factors, they get more and more specific to the listing at hand.
Hmm.
So we look at things like, how is your listing pacing against the market? So occupancy wise, are you behind the market or ahead of the market? What our tool will do, and most like operators should think about, unless they're operating under the notion that they want a full calendar, and we can talk about why I don't think that's a great idea, is that you should trail the market a little bit. Let the market kind of show you what is possible and keep your prices a little bit higher so that your occupancy can be just a bit behind the market and you could pick up the extra dollars. So we're
Hmm.
looking at market occupancy, we're looking at bedroom, like pacing bedroom sizes year over year. We're looking at if you just took a bad review.
Hmm.
So, not your overall review score. That'll go into sort of that initial price that's automatically generated. But if you just took a 3-star review, you're going to need to do something to pick up demand in the short term.
Exactly. The Airbnb algorithm is going to reduce your visibility if you get something like that. So,
So, you got to do something to bring the ranking back up. And usually that's like a price. That's a price either change or drop.
exactly. Exactly. You talk a lot about data, the data advantage, right? And that's obviously extremely critical. A lot of people have questions on their other pricing software providers, right? And if data sounds like it's a very important part of what you guys do, maybe talk a little about that. Like what differentiates your data from others and how you implement that into the pricing engine.
Yeah. I mean, data is critical. You can't make a great dinner without really solid ingredients. And there's a major difference between when you ask Instacart to go get you those ingredients versus you going to the farmer's market and picking them out yourself. I don't know about you, but Instacart constantly messes up my parsley versus cilantro. That's basically like the wonky metaphor that I use between using your own data, which Beyond does, versus buying other people's data, relying on third parties to give you what you need.
Hmm.
So, there's 3 pillars of data that we use that are incredibly important to inform any one day of pricing. The first is understanding what the whole world is doing. So, scraping data, we scrape both Airbnb and Booking.com to understand occupancy, listings, prices, right? And that's like the framing of the house. And then two, we have hundreds of thousands of listings that have connected to us that help us really enrich that data and
Hmm.
train our models to understand, is this a book or is this a block?
Hmm.
So let me tell you why that makes a big difference. If you think about Greece in November, you just look at Airbnb, scrape data, and you're going to think that it's 100% occupied. That's not true. It's 0% occupied, and all the calendars are blocked. That's really important, rich information that without your own data pipeline, you can't clean and understand.
Hmm.
And then the third piece of data, which is super proprietary to Beyond, is we're using intent data. We're using guest search data to really understand before a booking happens, what are guests searching for? When are they searching for? For how long are they searching? And that tells us that something might be need a little bit of tweaking when it comes to events that maybe just got announced where you haven't seen the changes in the market occupancy. And so
Hmm.
we're really able to help operators stay ahead of their market with that intent level data. It's a little bit like having a crystal ball. Even hotel revenue management systems don't really leverage this. Instead,
Hmm.
what they do is they have sort of like these sacrificial bookings. So they'll sacrifice a room or two at a low rate as an indicator that an event is coming because they can, because there's
Hmm.
one owner of that building, right? But that's not true in short-term rentals. You usually have one unit, one owner. And as a property management company, or if you own 5 units, you want to make the most of every single day, not
Right.
sacrifice to learn. And
Yeah.
so we're using all of those signals to help generate the best prices and ultimately help you beat the market.
Okay. That's great. AI is the biggest buzzword right now. How do you guys use AI within the operations? And to be candid, like, what's to prevent ChatGPT or Gemini in the future for a property manager like me, just to be like, okay, well, here's my historical data, tell me what to do and to populate it for me. I think a lot of people will kind of see that. Okay, well, people that come to us and ask like, hey, well, why don't I just use ChatGPT and ask what I should do, and I'll just incorporate that.
No, it's a really good question. And I think like artificial intelligence is sort of like this whole category. And Beyond's been using a segment of artificial intelligence since we got started, and that's machine learning. So our algorithm has been learning through inputs and outputs for over a decade. And so we've been in the AI game. Now, in the last year, you've seen a surge of generative AI. And so that's when you think about ChatGPT. You mentioned Gemini, which is getting forced down my throat when I use Google, or Claude by Anthropic. And what's to prevent these foundational LLMs from, frankly, taking my job? And what prevents those platforms from being as good as Beyond is they only have access to what's publicly available today.
Hmm.
And so if you want to pace with market, go ahead. You should use those. If you want to beat the market and if you want to do what Beyond says you could do, which is beat the market by 20 points or better, you have to use a system that has proprietary data access and historical data access. So because you've been collecting this data for, the better like over a decade, we have demand curves that are very well established and well understood.
Hmm.
Um, and that data moat is what those foundational AI models won't ever really have. And frankly, like, I'm not even sure that vacation rentals has really crossed their minds. They're just
Yeah.
figuring out how you can like buy merch on those websites or make a hotel booking. I do see that as potentially a displacer for things like Airbnb smart pricing, and maybe democratizing access to revenue management, which is really good for us,
Yeah.
frankly. The more people that know and understand that their calendar needs dynamism.
I mean, yeah, you're saying half the market doesn't even do anything. Does nothing, or very, very, very simple. That's actually crazy to me. When we first started using smart pricing, which is almost always too low because
Heads
Airbnb
and
just wants it.
beds. Yeah.
Yeah, they just want Airbnb just well, I mean, I think just incentivize. Airbnb just wants the booking. One, if it's a low booking, they make some commission, but more importantly, they kind of hook that customer into their ecosystem. They're like, okay, I just amazing $100 stay at this like beautiful 3-bedroom whatever, right, property. You as an owner kind of get screwed. For them, they're like, there's all this consumer surplus that just accrued to their customer, and it's going to make them come back. So we started there, and then after a while, I realized that one, that's a very poor idea. So then, we tried a bunch of different softwares, but now we have someone on our team to just kind of like revenue management just does it, because I think you just need like a separate discipline, and we use different data tools as well. But you need something. One, you need something, and if you don't have the time, and that's why I think the Be Honest product's really great. It's like you not set it and forget it, but it's a lot more automated, or a lot more automated to the extent that you can be in revenue management, I think, versus other more kind of manual solutions. So we're big proponents of that. And to hear that the data, actually, I didn't know about the intent stuff that you guys are doing. So that's really cool, actually, to kind of see ahead of the market.
Yeah, and I mean, we say like set it, but don't forget it. And our mantra is we're going to automate everything that can be automated, but give you control when you want it. The life of a short-term rental operator or owner is incredibly busy. Usually, especially if you're managing fewer than 5 properties, this is not your full-time gig. But you have check-ins happening, check-outs happening, you have to manage your operations. There is a ton on your plate. You're usually not in front of a desktop doing your, you know, figuring this all out unless you're doing your day job. So
Yeah.
that's why we've done things like launch a mobile app. That's why we meet you where you are with the alerts. Hey, by the way, this needs to happen. Click here to accept it. And do you want to always, for us to make this change, accept all? So those are the things that we're really leaning into to not just help people make more money, which has been our DNA, but
Hmm.
save them time and really just like alert them to where their attention needs to get paid because they're trying to scale themselves and scale their business without taking on additional costs.
Well, I mean, like, I mean, there are few softwares that truly pay for themselves, and then candidly, any revenue management software is going to be better than nothing. So if you're listening to this, you're not using something, you're at 55%. Like, you got to do something. If you have something in your PMS, just some type of customization is super important. Beyond other tools, definitely. I think you guys are probably one of the easiest one. You guys definitely are one of the easier ones to onboard and get running as quickly as possible. Other tools take more time. If this isn't going to be something that you do full time, I highly recommend at least checking out Beyond or some pricing tool, because you're just really
Thanks,
leaving.
Michael.
You're leaving. I mean, you're just leaving money on the table. I mean, you're just leaving money on the table. It really is. You're leaving money on the table.
Yeah.
None of us are doing this as a volunteer effort. To be fair, we're all investors here. We want to provide a great experience, but also want to get a return on our capital and our time. So I think it's really critical that people understand the value of this tool. And there are other tools in the market. I think depending on if you skew a certain way, you have a lot more time. You're very analytical. You want all the different controls. There's solutions for that. But if you want something, I think that is more straightforward. I think Beyond could be a great solution. Well, let's actually pivot the conversation a little bit. Just with all this great data that you have, so I'm going to ask you very kindly to share some insights
Yeah.
from that data. The market's definitely shifted since you joined Beyond, right, 6 years ago, or the height of COVID, or the depths of COVID, and then the snapback. The market has been more stable, but a bit more volatile over the last few years. So maybe just talk about like 2025, like what did data tell you, and how does it inform kind of the view here in the U.S. specifically for 2026? Like
Yeah.
what's not?
Yeah. I mean, those are big questions, but you're right. I mean, I started sort of like
You
right
got a
as
big
the COVID.
title, you get the big questions.
Yeah. When I started at Beyond, it was March 2nd. So we were,
Oh wow.
yeah, yeah, that was fun. So what we saw is obviously a massive shutdown, and then just the dam broke open in May. And so many people left money on the table. Talk about like people's calendar filled up overnight. But those that were using tools, didn't, because they were able to sort of calibrate quickly. And then 21 was fantastic. 22, great start to the year. 22 second half, we started to see headwinds. And what really caused those headwinds, one was the interest rate environment. So you had more inventory on the market, but now interest rates were changing and getting higher. You also had a bunch of people come into the market in that 20 to 22 time period and have incredible expectations that every year you're going to have a double digit return or a double digit increase on your return. That proved to not be true. And then third was just now in the back half of 22, you had a plethora of travel options. So cruises are back online, resorts are really back open. So there's only so much travel demand. There's only so many humans in the world. And now when you have more options than just short-term rentals, people are required to be back in school, back at work, yada yada. So we really started to see a contraction both on ADR and occupancy, starting the back half of 22, which really continued into about the latter part of 2024. That's where I think some of that, like, we were able to wake some of those sleeping dragons that knew their market but had to adapt. So you think about some of these markets that are 7 day, Saturday to Saturday check in. Forget that. Like, that day is over. You have new travelers, you have Gen Z, they want 3 day, 4 day weekends, right? And so how are you capturing that demand? And operators have really had to be more nimble when it comes to some of those like paradigms and well held onto patterns that were around for decades. So now we fast forward into 25, we have a market that's like pretty corrected, quite frankly, on the
Yeah.
US side. Supply is metered. On the operator side, though, now private equity has started to enter the game. And so you're seeing a lot of consolidation, the mid to large players with these folks that are institutionally backed.
So
Um,
sorry, just to pause you there for a moment. So
yeah,
I'm kind of curious, actually. So are you talking about private equity from a consolidation of property managers, or are you talking about properties? 'Cause, we definitely see that on the PM side. Or are you talking about them buying properties and buying up short-term rentals?
it's more, I guess it's more felt on the property manager side. We do
Hmm.
know like TPG and Blackstone obviously have investments in short-term rentals assets vis-a-vis property management companies. Like they own the assets in of themselves. Whether or not that'll continue to be true based on some of the, administration's rhetoric, we don't
Mhm.
know. But it's more on the property management company side that you do see a higher level of consolidation. Now we're nowhere near like where there's only five PMCs, right? Like there's
Yeah, it's like there's no gray star.
exactly. So that's a trend in the market that I think is really interesting, and I want to see play out because certain markets you might have market makers, but on the for those operators that aren't part of those larger organizations or are part and still want like to understand what's going on in the market, what they really felt in 25 was a compression of book from the time you book to the time you stay. So a compression
Yeah.
of what we call lead time. I mean, that's dropped double digits since 24 year over year over year. Um,
The
so,
lead time, the windows are they're completely collapsed,
it,
actually.
I mean, we're
It's
looking
crazy.
like, well, we're not quite at hotel levels, but we're looking at, weeks, like a
Yeah.
couple of weeks before guests show up. And so what has to be tight is one, your operations obviously have to be tight. But what we saw also in 25 was those that had sort of this like static approach to last minute discounting. So if I have inventory that's still there, that's open within 30 days, I'm just going to drop the price. Consumers are trained. Guests are now
Yeah.
trained to look for
Yeah.
that. And so we released a feature. I mean, I know I'm not supposed to like, we have to like combat that and say, like, hey, no, the guest is going to book. Don't drop your price. There is demand. You just have to be patient. And sometimes when you
The
have
last man standing strategy.
a computer software intervening versus like,
Yeah.
you know, look, I get twitchy and anxious. Like when I had to buy Taylor Swift tickets, like I knew I would get a better deal if I waited, but my daughter was standing behind me sweating, so I had to just buy them. And I bought them at a premium, whatever, fine. But like when you have a computer that's sort of like you can disintermediate that emotion, they can hold price, you'll get the booking at a higher rate. So the compression of lead time is a massive
Yeah.
trend.
Well,
Yeah.
before we go off Taylor Swift, by the way, she's like every short-term rental person when she did the tour, the Eras tour, like 2 years ago, like it was like manna from heaven. Like every city she touched, you were able to get these amazing bookings. So shout out to Taylor Swift for showering. It was like the eclipse. It was like the eclipse like 2 years back where you were on that band, like you
Yeah.
crushed it. And if you had Taylor Swift coming to your market, 25, 24, 25, I forget now.
It was both 24 and
Or 25.
25. Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, she came to Philly. So we have a bunch of inventory in Philly. Unfortunately, it was like she overlapped with graduation week, which is another big week for us. But
Ooh.
it was like incredible the amount of money that people would pay to go see her. So shout out Taylor Swift if you're listening. We appreciate you. We in short term rental land appreciate you.
And then you got Oasis, and now, now you have the
Who?
World Cup.
Oh yeah, that's what I was talking about. So World Cup. I'm actually really curious, right? Because there's a conference I was supposed to go to in Florida today that I didn't get to go because um, I'm a good dad and needed to stay home for my kids. But
Yeah. Make sure you remind them of that.
I will. I've tattooed it in the reverse on their head, so when they see the mirror, they can read it properly. But we haven't seen like we and our peers, we haven't seen the onrush of World Cup bookings across these markets, and people can explain a bunch of different things about why people may not want to come to US given, different reasons. What are you seeing from the data?
Yeah. The tickets for the actual matches are exorbitant, just exorbitant. And so that I think is a barrier, regardless of the geopolitical tensions, right? That's a barrier in and of itself. We are seeing some of the smaller markets in the US actually pick up demand. So Kansas City, Seattle, we've seen an uptick in demand. The larger markets like Miami, LA, whatever you want to
Philly?
call.
Philly.
Do they even have games in
Where
Philly?
pardon
They
me?
don't have they don't have games in Philly.
They do. They do. No, they do.
Really?
Yeah, it's Philly, Dallas. Yeah.
Oh man, lucky you. Well, it's coming.
Well, I hope so. But yeah,
Yeah,
I mean, we think it, look, we think just to your point, just to mirror the two concepts, like we think it's a booking window. One, it's expensive.
yeah,
Two, one, like the tickets are really expensive, right? Two, I think there is a reticence to travel to the US right now. There are like, visa issues and broader geopolitical things that have made people more reticent, I think, to come here. We think people will come. It's just that booking
Yeah.
window, that collapsed booking window that we saw in 25 just continue to migrate in 26. Is that theory supported by your crystal ball?
Yeah, I would say hold prices if you haven't seen bookings. I mean, I don't right now I just got an email yesterday that like FIFA has now a visa situation where you can actually get a visa if you want to travel to the US. Canada and Mexico are doing fine in terms of bookings, but it's the US that's lagging a little bit.
Interesting. Okay. I didn't know that actually. Okay.
Yeah,
Okay.
both on ticket sales and then accommodation wise. The
Interesting.
other, if you actually go buy World Cup tickets, Airbnb is like on that page, so they are feeding in listings from that market into the ticket page in and of itself. So Airbnb
Hmm.
has done a really good job of
Okay.
cross promoting. So if you're not on Airbnb and you are in a World Cup city, I would suggest getting on Airbnb so you can get that cross
Brian, great job.
promotion.
Brian, great job. If you're
Yeah,
listening, great
I
job,
think that
Brian.
was Brian's idea.
Appreciate it, Brian.
Yeah, but I would say like hold because the other thing is like the
Okay.
only thing that's been like it's only the group stage, right?
Yeah.
That we know about. And so as matches kind of, we get closer and the tickets will drop in price, you're going to see a higher demand. So I would say like be patient
Okay.
or let us be patient for you.
Well, be patient. I mean, it's the same thing though, right? Like, it's obviously a human can override the software, any software, right? So, well, for now, until AGI takes over, it's good to hear because I think there is definitely a thread amongst short-term rental operators in these markets, a concern, right? Because I think a lot of people are underwriting that June's going to be a monster month, given, and people have held their prices, given the World Cup and this influx of international travel. So I guess one, it's good to hear that Canada and Mexico are doing well because it tells us that it's a U.S. issue, not like a broader issue. If you believe that people are going to come and watch it, they need somewhere to stay. They're not going to sleep in their Hertz rental car, and especially they can afford a ticket, right? So let's all be hopeful. So if you're listening here, do not drop your prices, especially in Philadelphia.
Oh,
Since I have my prices high, I don't need you to undercut me, please.
maybe you do want them to drop it and then you're the last man standing, right?
This is true. This is, fair, fair, fair. Well,
I,
I'll consult your algorithm later.
let's do it. I have tickets and I haven't booked our place.
Oh, really?
Um, yeah.
Where are you going? Where are you going?
Oh, so Kansas City.
Okay.
I did
Oh,
the
okay.
like the blind draw, so the matches aren't super great, and then Santa Clara, aka San Francisco.
Think of 26. Like, what do you think? What do you think? What's working in 26? Like, what's going to work in 26
Yeah,
based on your data? Like mountain
yeah,
markets, like the beach, the cities. Like, what's working? What's going to work?
dude, mountains in the U.S., man, it's tough.
Mountains?
It's a tough go. No, bad.
No.
No snow. I think Tahoe's the only place that's gotten snow right now.
We have a
Robin
lot of
says
snow. We have a lot of snow in the Catskills. I have a property in the Catskills. Great skiing there.
great. So East Coast Tahoe, you're fine. If you're
Co-
in the Rockies, my heart goes
Yeah,
out
it's
to you.
tough. Yeah, it's
Yeah,
really tough. I've seen the Colorado. It's just no
yeah.
snow out there.
No snow. I mean, I think the dollar is still weak, so you're probably still going to see a lot of domestic travel.
Hmm.
So I would expect that to continue. I don't know how much, the US is sort of like inbound from international places. We'll probably see just like the same in 25, less of that.
Yeah.
Operationally, I think we're still in a world where you have shortened lead times. And then from an operator standpoint, labor costs are just going up and expectations of profitability are also going up. And so people are going to need to find scale where they can scale their business,
Hmm.
i.e., do more with less, grow revenue faster than you grow your expenses. And I think that knob gets turned way up in 26,
Hmm.
and will just become a theme of the future. How can you just automate all of the, banal, like things that you're doing, pulling levers so that you can focus on your owner acquisition, your owner retention, and the guest experience?
Well, it's kind of motherhood and apple pie, though. To be fair, though, right? Grow revenue faster than costs,
I,
and use
I,
and
you just like literally summarize every single board meeting that I have. Why aren't you growing revenue? Well, fewer people.
fair enough, fair enough. No, no. Okay, look, I mean, and I think the one of the really easy ways is just get really good at revenue management. If you're a short-term rental operator, like like I said, it's all drop down margin, right? Every extra dollar that you can get on ADR, well, I guess less the fees from your revenue manager, but effectively it's all drop down margin. So if there's a way to improve margin very, very quickly, is getting good at revenue management. So, look, if you're 1 to 65% out there, that's not using some type of software or some type of customization, you got to get on that horse. For our community, we think that, there's Beyond is a great platform. And if you want something that's, easy to use, easy to get set up, can do a lot of the heavy lifting, we think it's a great solution. So, Julie, keep doing the good work there. Appreciate, got to know your team. Appreciate, shout out to Rachel for organizing this episode for us. It's great to meet someone else that's been through the bumps and bruises of this industry, and we're lucky to have you, and keep doing a good work at Beyond. If there's one thing that we can do is like better software for revenue management, that is the biggest needle mover. So we're lucky to have you, Julie.
I appreciate you, Michael. It's all I care and think about. It's what gets me out of bed in the morning is how I can help you all grow and make more money.
There you go.
So
Well, you're incentivized, right? Because your fee structure is 1%. So if we don't make money, you don't make money, right?
this
So
is true.
I like that. I mean, look, that alignment makes sense. Last question, kind of my traditional closing question. Business is a team sport. We don't get to where we are without help along the way. What's one of the kindest things that someone has done for you along your journey to get you where you are today in that CEO seat?
Oh, that's it. That's a big question. I agree with you that we don't get to where we are without just a mountain of people. And frankly, my job at Beyond is to hire the best and then get the hell out of their way, because we have an incredible team. But there was one human. Her name was Jill Voigt back at Deloitte. So I started in consulting, and she gave me this little statue, which was it looked like somebody in like child's pose, but she's like, put this on your desk. And whenever you have a moment of self-doubt or imposter syndrome, look at that and look at that person bowing down to you. Because you need to believe in yourself if you're going to really make a dent. And she had been through the ringer, right? We're talking like a woman who was a professional in the 80s. She was a partner at Deloitte. Like she had been through the misogyny that existed back in the day. So Jill Voigt, thank you. Now I have an overflated sense of self that, just joking.
You're not, but okay.
My ego's in check. Yeah.
No, that's right. Well, I mean, before the show, I saw that there's like 10 of those statues now. So I'm glad you
But they're actual real humans.
you develop quite. You have almost an entire basketball team's worth of statues there. No, that's really like shout out to Jill. And we never get to. We all stand on the shoulder of giants, especially in business. Like it's especially the more senior you are, the more you rely on your team. And yeah, I mean, like I think even as an investor, like there's a bit of imposter syndrome. Like, hey, like, can I do this? Like, you see other people are more successful. Like, can I do this? Like, and you absolutely can. I just got to believe in yourself that you can push through the eventual adversities that come along the way. Appreciate you listening to the show. Like, this is a great way to learn about how to be successful. And look, we've all kind of gone through. I've been doing this for 9 years. Definitely in the beginning, it was hard, a lot to learn. But if you can push through it, it's a really great place to invest your time and your money, because with bonus depreciation, you can offset your active income with short-term rentals, and if you do it properly, it can cash flow for you and hold it for a long enough time. And real estate has proven to go up right over a long enough time period. So. If you can do that, then it's a really great way to build wealth. And Julie, appreciate your role in the ecosystem and helping us do that.
Thank you. And you give people lasting memories. Come on.
Yeah, and of course, the guests.
Yeah.
Lasting exactly. You're correct. And go ahead.
What's better?
Nothing's better than a happy guest that gives you a 5-star review that paid the appropriate market clearing price.
There we go.
All right, Julie, thank you very much. Folks, again, if you enjoyed this show, please like and subscribe. Thank you. Like and subscribe, and please do share with a friend. Julie's going to listen to this episode and leave a very nice comment. And if you feel that this is a great episode, please do leave a comment. We appreciate your feedback. Julie, thank you again for your time.